Not quite a trekking pole, but it'll get the job done. Welcome back, guys. So I wanted to make this video to be a guide on how to do one of the world's most famous treks. If you're a fan of hiking, mountains, or nature, then you must consider doing this trek at some point in your life. The trek I'm talking about, of course, is the trek to Mount Everest Base Camp. After you finish this trek, you'll be able to utilize a technique that's commonly used when applying for jobs. So it says here on your resume that you worked for Google. What did you do there? Don't worry about it. That's right. You'll be able to say, I went to Mount Everest, and hope that people think you're one of the few skilled mountaineers that are able to reach the top of the mountain. In all seriousness though, even just being able to say that you went to Everest Base Camp is pretty impressive already. It's not something that a lot of people can say, and even to this day, I still consider it some of the most exciting weeks of my life. So keep watching and I'll tell you everything you need to know about it. The good, the bad, and the ugly. So the first thing you need to know is that before entering the country, you need to get a visa on arrival. But you don't need to worry because you can just go to the airport and pick this up. You have to pay $50, fill in some information, and then you're good to go. This visa, the $50 one, will allow you to stay in Nepal for 30 days, which is the usual length of stay that most people choose. Next thing you need to consider is whether you want to do this trek alone or maybe with a friend if you're going with one, or if you want to enlist the help of a trekking agency. Choosing to do the hike independently will be cheaper, but you will have to deal with more hassle like booking accommodation yourself. So it's really up to you if you feel like you want to spend a bit more and then have less to worry about in terms of logistics. I see a lot of people mention safety as one of the reasons why you should choose to use a third-party trekking agency, but the entire trail itself is pretty safe. And this is a really popular trek, so there's always going to be people on the trail. Just make sure you don't go off the beaten road by yourself, especially at times like nighttime, and you'll be fine. Another thing that I see a lot of people really worry about is thinking, oh, can I do this? Is this too difficult? Oh, I don't know if I'm fit enough to do something like this. It's true that there are a lot of reasons related to your fitness that should make you consider whether you want to do this trek or not. But in terms of how actually difficult the hike is, I wouldn't say it's difficult, it's just tiring. The typical itinerary usually assumes that you'll be doing about 6 hours of hiking a day. Even during the parts of the trail that can take longer because you're going uphill, this can actually work in your favor. The main reason that people end up not being able to complete this trek is altitude sickness, not their own fitness level. Altitude sickness is basically what happens when your body is not used to the air being so thin at higher altitudes. The thing that makes this dangerous is that there's no easy way to prepare for this. For me, the only way I could prepare for it was by going to other countries and hiking at higher altitudes. At another layer of uncertainty, it really affects everybody differently. Some people might not experience any symptoms of it, some people might get hit with it really early on. So that's why I'm saying that even if you go at a slower rate, it works in your favor. Because if you go slower, then you can acclimatize to the altitude better. For reference, I'm a 25-year-old guy, in the prime of my life. I've seen many people much younger and much older than me on the trail as well. Worst case scenario, there are pills that you can buy on this trek, such as Diamox to help treat altitude sickness, but it's really best to just not get it at all. I experienced it a bit on the final days of the trek, and let me tell you, it's not a good feeling. Don't worry, I'll talk more about how to deal with this and how to prevent it when I talk about a typical itinerary for this trek later in the video. So in terms of prepping your fitness level for this trek, the best thing you can really do is just improve your cardio a bit. Go out for walks more, go out for runs more, every little bit will help. If you also go to the gym, you can stay on the lookout for stair climbing machines. And speaking of equipment, the most important thing that you can buy for this trek is a good pair of hiking shoes. The ankle support will be life-saving, literally. Another thing you can do is consider buying a pair of trekking poles. These help take the strain off your legs and give your arms something to do as well. Other things that you can consider buying or bringing if you have them already is a good sleeping bag. Because the accommodation quality is not the best, because after all, Nepal still is an underdeveloped country, and it gets really cold, especially the higher up you go. While we're on the topic of cold, you should definitely pack clothes and jackets or anything that you can easily put on and put off. Because even if the temperature stayed consistent throughout the day, your body will feel colder or hotter depending on how active you are. So while on the hike, you might only need one jacket and one shirt, but when you're relaxing in your accommodation where there's not going to be any heating probably, you're probably going to feel the need for much more layers. Another thing I should probably mention is that throughout the hike, it's going to be really difficult to find hot water showers. So one thing that I found helped a lot was wet wipes. These wet sanitary napkins will unfortunately substitute for your showers for a lot of the hike. So at many points during the hike, you'll have to experience what it's like to be a computer science student and not shower for multiple days. Now let's talk about what time you should do this trek. Months of April and October are the times when most people opt to do this trek, because these months avoid the monsoon season and bring the best weather. After all, you wouldn't want to go through the entire trek only to see this, right? Pro tip, if you're missing anything for this trek or maybe just want to buy something more, buy it in Kathmandu, which is the capital city that you're probably going to be flying into. If you choose to buy this on other smaller cities on the actual trek itself, you're going to be paying some pretty ridiculous prices, because those guys know that if you need to buy it at that point, you messed up one way or another. With that being said, the next thing that you need to know would be the budget for this trip. So this is a question that's going to be a lot more difficult to answer, because the answer to this question can really vary. A lot of it really comes down to how comfortable you want to be on this trek. For example, if you want everything taken care of for you and you book with a trekking agency and you want access to amenities whenever possible, such as hot showers, you could be looking at upwards of $2,000. On the other hand, if your goal is to make this trip cheap and you want to plan everything yourself and save on certain amenities, then you could be even looking at as low as $700, $800 for the whole experience. This is not including the flight into Kathmandu from wherever you are currently, of course. If you do end up booking with a third-party trekking agency, then the cost is pretty upfront and clear to you. Usually the package that they offer to you is all-inclusive. So for example, it will cover any sort of transportation costs, any accommodation costs, food costs, everything, to try to make your experience as enjoyable as possible. If you plan to go with a trekking agency, then the only sort of hidden fees that you'll usually run into are tips, when you have to tip the guide, tip the porters, etc. Of course, no matter what, you should still bring extra cash for emergency situations. If you're planning to do this trek independently, then you can expect to spend around $30 to $50 every day on the trek. At the time that I went, at the beginning of the trek, there were also 2 different permits that you need to buy. The permits totaled up to $50 and all visitors who wish to do this trek must buy it. Keep in mind that the later the trek you are, or in other words, the higher you are, the more expensive everything can get. It can get to some pretty criminal rates. I had to spend $20 to get a bag of chips at the very last day before arriving to Everest Base Camp. Just take my wallet at that point, man. And truth be told, the food really wasn't that good on the trek. Disclaimer, that doesn't mean that I'm saying that Nepalese food is not good. Quite the contrary, I had really positive experiences with food in Kathmandu, for example. Due to the difficulty of getting supplies onto the trek, readily available for tourists and locals alike, that makes the quality of the food suffer. Meals typically range from $3 to $10, and it depends on what you order. Because of the large amount of tourists on this trek, they always have local options and Western options alike, if you don't like the local ones. One really important thing that you need to know, if you forget everything else in this video, please remember this. Avoid the meat once you're farther along the trek. Because remember how I said that it's difficult for supplies to be brought up along the trek? The reason is because they're carried like this. It's a pretty cool thing to see actually, and you will learn to hear and respect these animals when they pass, or else they're just gonna trample you. And this is the main reason why I'm telling you to avoid eating meat on this trek. The meat will have been ferried in from a long way from here and is usually not very fresh. Last thing you want to do on this trek is increase your chances of getting sick. But you don't have to worry about it too much, because I promise you the views more than make up for the lackluster food on the trek. Water will also range from anywhere from 50 cents to $3 per 1 liter bottle throughout the trek. Buy much more than what you need, because one of the key ways to keep away altitude sickness is staying as hydrated as you can. You're also going to need it because of the insane amounts of walking you're going to be doing every day. Other than water, you're usually going to be drinking hot tea or coffee on this trip. You're not going to find too much of a variety in drinks on this trek as well. Bread, potatoes, egg, bread, potatoes, egg, bread, potatoes, egg. In all honesty, it's not like the food is terrible. It's just the lack of variety and lack of meat made me very sad. The biggest part of the cost that you will incur will be, of course, the accommodation. You'll most likely be staying at tea houses throughout the trek, and these tea houses can go from, usually in my experience, $10 to $20 a night. Again, these prices depend heavily on how far along the trek you are and also what amenities you want to buy. One important amenity that you might want to consider is the access to internet. It can be quite annoying to have access to internet on this trek, because Buying a SIM card or using an eSIM to get access to internet only works up until a certain point in the trail. After this point, only a few of the tea houses or accommodation that you stay at will have access to internet. For me, I wanted to stay connected to family and friends, so I just bit the bullet and I paid $20. Another cost that you have to keep in mind is the cost of your transportation from Kathmandu to Lukla. Lukla is a small city where most people begin their trek from. If you choose to go during the popular months, so April and October, usually what happens is you will have to take some sort of bus or car to go from Kathmandu to Ramchap, and take a flight from Ramchap to Lukla. The bus from Kathmandu to Ramchap is about $30 usually, and you leave very early in the night with a group of other people. The sketchy flight from Ramchap to Lukla costs $178 for a single ticket one way. And because you're almost certainly going to repeat this journey on the way back from Lukla, you should prepare a total of $400. If you choose to go at a time that's not during the popular months, there might be direct flights available from Kathmandu directly to Lukla. Also, for the bus or taxi from Kathmandu to Ramchap, even though you're leaving very late at night, the road is very bad, so don't expect to get any sleep. The last fee that you might end up needing to pay is related to transportation during the trek. For example, if you find yourself feeling too sick or maybe too tired to continue for the day, you can rent a horse to help take you to the next point of your trek. There are also helicopters that you can charter out for emergencies. Using this helicopter should really only be a last resort though, because it is ridiculously expensive. I saw some people take this helicopter, even though they weren't sick or tired, they simply just wanted to return back to Kathmandu fast enough. Because at Lukla, the airport there is very unpredictable. Flights can be cancelled at a moment's notice for the entire rest of the day because of weather. And it makes sense, they really need to make sure that everything's perfect for any place to take off, because Lukla does hold the title of the world's most dangerous airport. It's not unheard of for people to have their plans delayed by multiple days because of the weather. In my experience, I was delayed for a total of 2 days. These delays will result in you spending extra money, of course. So now you can kind of see how important it is to plan this trip well. Because improper planning can lead to some really unfortunate things happening, like missing a flight. The flight price could be more than the entire trip combined for you. So that's why now I'm going to show you what a typical schedule for this trek looks like. And my tips to make sure you don't miss your flight out of Nepal. So most itineraries that you will come across will recommend you 14 days. And this includes everything from landing in Kathmandu to finishing the trek to coming back to Kathmandu. Something like this. The numbers on this map correspond to the day of the trek that you're on. Keep in mind that a lot of itineraries recommend that you spend at least 2 days on the trek acclimatizing to the altitude. For example, in the map here, they spent both the 3rd and the 4th day in Namche Bazaar. So you'll be arriving in Namche Bazaar on the 3rd day, sleeping there overnight, and then on the 4th day, what you'll usually do is trek upwards a couple of 100 meters and then return back to Namche Bazaar to sleep. Acclimatization days are important to help your body get used to the altitude. Even if you're a very experienced hiker who has been at such altitudes, it's still recommended to not skip these acclimatization days if you have no good reason to. You'll also notice that going up to the base camp takes much more days than going down. One thing you'll find on a lot of these maps is that they don't really account for the fact that the weather can cause such significant delays. Because again, bad weather causing delays isn't a matter of hours in this case, it's a matter of days. Being delayed 1 day on a very tight itinerary means that you can miss your flight entirely and have to book a new one. My number one tip for you if you're planning this trip is to add 2 or 3 buffer days. If your expected trip length is 14 days, make it 16 or 17 instead. It's not like you have to spend those days wasting around doing nothing either. Whether you're in Kathmandu, Ramchap, or Lukla, there's plenty to see and do there. So best case scenario, assuming there's good weather and you're skipping acclimatization days, you can even finish this trek in as little as 11 days. I really wouldn't recommend that. You're leaving this trip's success up to the weather in Lukla and also skipping acclimatization days, which can put your entire trek at risk. If I could go back in time and have the chance to replan my trip, I would definitely plan it to have 16 days. Because I've gone hiking in many places around the world, and nothing really compares to how amazing the Himalayas are. Seriously, I've never seen anything like these before. You should know that each day you're looking at an average of about 600 to 700 meters of elevation gain, which is very doable given you have the entire day to clear that. The rule of not going too fast applies while going up, it doesn't when you're going down. So in the unlikely case that you're heavily delayed at the beginning of your trip, if you need to shave days off your itinerary, shave it off on the descent. Just keep in mind that although while you're going down, you don't have to worry about altitude sickness anymore, you do have to worry about your knees. That's exactly what happened to me. And I covered 52 kilometers on the day after I reached the base camp. But I didn't pay attention to what my body was telling me, and I had some pretty rough pain in my knees for about a week after. So again, that just stresses the importance of having extra days in your itinerary to make sure that you don't ever feel so rushed. After all, this experience should be a very exciting one where you're finally checking off one of the items on your bucket list. It shouldn't be a stressful one that should feel rushed. Please don't make the same mistakes I did. One final thing regarding the length of this trip is that regardless of how many days you have, the path that you're going to take to get to Everest Base Camp is likely going to be the same. The vast majority of the treks have you arrive in Kathmandu first, then reach Lukla. From Lukla, you trek past Paktin. The place you arrive to next is called Namche Bazaar. Namche Bazaar is a pretty big hub, so a lot of people choose to do their acclimatization day here. After Namche Bazaar, you get to Tanbolche. Tanbolche is very interesting because there's a monastery in this village, and I had an amazing time spending time with the people of the monastery. After Tanbolche, you arrive at Dimbolche, which is another relatively large village. Most people also choose to add in another acclimatization day here. By this point, the altitude that you reached is quite high, so your altitude gain every day is going to start to slow down. Dimbolche is already at 4,400 meters high. After Dimbolche, you arrive at Loboche. By this point, you'll start to notice that it gets really cold as well. Finally, the night before you finally reach the base camp, you spend the night at Gorikshep. After celebrating your achievement of reaching the base camp, it's time to head back down. On the way down, you'll mostly be retracing the same steps. You'll go past the same big villages, and the main difference is that you'll be going down at a much faster rate than you were going up. Because you don't need to worry about altitude sickness, and also you're probably going to be in a hurry to get as low as possible after spending so many nights in such cold temperature. Because there's not really any heating in these rooms, so unless you want to sleep in a huge jacket, you better pick a pretty good sleeping bag. If you don't want to buy a sleeping bag just for this trip, it's possible to even rent out sleeping bags or rent out jackets at other larger villages like Namche Bazaar. And the same applies for any other thing you might need as well. But don't worry too much about being 100% prepared for this trip. If you've forgotten something important, chances are someone else has as well. There will be chances to get what you need on this trek. However, there is one thing that you cannot buy while you're on this trek. Some people view this as a scam, others view it as a necessity. That's right, it's insurance. So when I talk about insurance, I'm talking about travel insurance. So insurance for if an emergency occurs on your trek. A lot of people view such a long trek in such a mountainous area as very dangerous, but the reality is it's really safe. Just be aware of your surroundings. Don't get too caught up taking videos and pictures. I know it's pretty, but at the very least pay attention to your surroundings. The vast majority of the trail will have roads that look like this. And although some parts might not have roads that were maintained or that were paved, a slip in those areas would not mean anything more than a bruise. As long as you use your common sense and keep your eyes on the road, the chances of you getting seriously injured will be very low. However, although it's rare, the possibility of you being affected by altitude sickness so seriously that you can't even walk anymore is still there. So use this information to determine whether you need insurance or to what degree you need the insurance. Note that if you decide to do this trek with a third-party trekking agency, some of them require you to have insurance before you do this trip. As someone who's so broke that being cheap is a personality trait, you can probably guess how much insurance I got. And I think that covers most of what you would need to know to get out there and do this trek yourself. If I missed anything or if there's something you want to know in addition, leave a comment. I will respond to everything. I know that this trek is also a bucket list item for many other people around the world. I hope that I was able to make it a bit easier for you if you ever plan to do something like this as well. Even if you're not, I hope you were able to get some insight into what this trek is like. I plan to make a video about the entire trek itself from start to finish. So if you're interested in that or want to see more travel videos in general, please do me a favor and subscribe. Hope you enjoyed and have yourself an amazing day. Was that even worth the risk?